We're pleased to have Anil Anora join us today. He is the former Chief Statistician of Canada, an adjunct lecturer at the Harvard Kennedy School, and a global digital consultant with the World Bank. Anil has dedicated his professional career to partnering with the business sector, academia, and all levels of government to build a culture of innovation. He has co-authored and helped steer the Government of Canada's data strategy. Anil has helped to shape the data and digital landscape, both domestic and global. He has significant experience in the private and public sectors, as well as leading international forums in the United Nations and the OECD, Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development.
Joining Anil will be Colin Poular. Colin is the president of the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association since 2014. Prior to the SCSA, Colin spent several years working in the labor market development and technology management roles. Colin also serves on a number of industry community boards. Please welcome Colin and Anil.
Great. Thanks, Dallas and Stu. Good morning, Anil. It's good to see you, man.
Good morning. How are you, Colin?
Great. I don't know what you thought about the pie chart joke, but you probably heard a few. Well, first of all, again, thank you for taking your time to join us today. Just for folks who are watching, Anil was actually supposed to be taking this from the other side of the planet today. He was scheduled to be speaking at the World Bank and fitting us in, but it seems like that travel plan has got adjusted somewhat. So he is in Canada joining us here. It's only a couple hours time difference. I really appreciate that. And Anil, I'm hoping that as you go through your presentation, we also talk a little bit about yourself in a little bit more depth. For those that don't know, Anil and I've had the opportunity to connect in another forum with other leaders in Canada, and through that contact, got to know a bit more about Anil's Prairie connection, his connection with the construction industry, oil and gas, and kind of how that has shaped a lot of his leadership over the last number of years, and to the point now that he is actually guiding people globally on so much of this today. So I'm hoping you touch on some of that, Anil, and then Anil's going to go into almost a TED Talk style, I think, in terms of a bit of a presentation, and then I'll have a few questions. We're also going to open up to questions that people can put into the chat. And hopefully we'll have enough opportunity to be able to grab some of those and respond to those. So, Anil, maybe I'll let you start rolling, and we'll go from there.
That sounds great. Thank you for that very, very generous introduction, and it's always good to see you again, my friend. And first of all, congratulations on this conference and the great work that not only you are leading at the SCSA, but really generally in the industry as well, to make it the industry safer for everybody. So I just want to say congratulations and thank you. So I've got a presentation. Yes, it does have some charts, and I don't know about pie charts, but it does have charts and graphs and so on. Don't feel intimidated. There's no test at the end. I've kept the formulae right to an absolute minimum. And there's more information in the presentation. So I don't know, Colin, if you're going to share it with others, but I don't want people to feel like, oh my God, he didn't touch on this or touch on that. It's supposed to guide the conversation, and then you have material to refer to afterwards. And as always, you can always reach me through Colin. So I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. I'm going to try and hit the highlights so you get a sense of sort of what the construction sector, where are we today in Canada, and then get to the real interactive session, which is where I think most of the interesting part lies. So let me start again by congratulating you and thank you, Colin and Amber and the Saskatchewan Construction Safety Association for this kind invitation to share a few trends and thoughts with you today. I also want to take a minute to recognize and honor the Indigenous people in the lands on which we are gathered, no matter where you're joining us from today. So we'll move on to the next slide, and hopefully you can follow along on these slides. Like I said, don't worry too much if you miss on a lot of the detail. It's not that germane. And as I said, you can always refer to it later. The point of this is, we are a nation of builders, right? Canada is a land of builders, and construction is part of our being. Whether it's to shelter us, from the elements, obviously with our weather, to connect us from coast to coast to coast, to allow our precious natural resources or cargo to flow that gives us our standard of living and our wealth, to responsibly extract natural resources to create wealth and the prosperity that we rely on and we enjoy. Without construction, I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say there would be no Canada. Whether it's Arctic stations, whether it's the Canada arm, whether it's the oil sands, the LNG terminals, whether it's harnessing our tides, the solar, the Canadian light source, for example, uranium extraction or potash plants, the Confederation Bridge, pipelines, skyscrapers, multifamily homes, you name it. We depend on construction, on professionals like all of you who design and build and do it over and over safely and efficiently. So I just want to say thank you. Next slide, please. Colin mentioned a little bit, I came to Alberta with my family as an immigrant. That's now over 50 years ago, believe it or not. And I too did some jobs in the construction sector, whether it was insulating homes. Then I worked on well sites all over Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, back in the 1980s. Although most of my public service career was spent at Statistics Canada, I also served as the Senior Assistant Deputy Minister at Natural Resources Canada, and I was responsible there for our policy in our forest, mining, nuclear, oil, and gas sectors, of which safety was a component. Then moved on to Health Canada to ensure that our regulatory system worked efficiently, keeping us safe in the use of whether it's our pharmaceuticals, whether it's our food systems, whether it's medical devices, whether it's natural health products, and so on. I retired from the government a year ago, and as Colin said and was introduced at the beginning, I served as the Chief Statistician of Canada, the head storyteller based on official statistics for the last 8 years. So we'll go to the next slide. The next few slides I'm going to go through quite rapidly, but look, Canada is an aging nation. I don't think that's a big surprise to any of you. Our median age now is 40.3 years. Our average age is slightly higher than that at 41.6 as of last summer. And at the moment, the population that's 0 to 14, so the kids, actually are outnumbered by seniors that are over the age of 65. So it's about almost 20% seniors and just over 15% children. The fastest growing segment of our population is for those that are over the age of 85. Our fertility rate is 1.26, and you need 2.1 to replace. And so, it's no surprise at all that now almost all our growth in population is due to immigration. 100% of our labor growth is due to immigration. Out of the roughly 1.6 million Canadians who work in the construction sector, just under 250,000 are expected to retire by 2032, and that's not that far away. Obviously, that's going to create another shortfall projected to be somewhere, around 61,000 workers or so. The number of apprentice certificate holders has also decreased in the construction trade. The record declines in trade registrations during the pandemic still have not recovered, leaving significant gaps in the supply. And so we see this supply and demand imbalance in journeymen, journey persons, further worsening this labor shortage in skilled trades. So let's go to the next slide. Looking at our job vacancy survey and the census, we looked at red seal trades. The number of tradespeople actually declined between 2016 and 2021. Construction trade helpers and laborers, meanwhile, saw a small increase of 20,000 people. But as I mentioned earlier, nearly all of the growth in the labor force came from immigration, and yet the number of immigrants working in the trades decreased by 11.2% or 38,160 people. Next slide. Don't worry about it. As I said, these slides will be there. I don't want you to get too worried about the sequence of these things. The number of non-permanent, so this slide, I mean, just goes to show you the, the age differences in the trade sector. Let's move on to the next slide, if I could. These are, again, we're seeing trades that saw decreases across all age groups between 2016 and 2021. So you can see the different types of trades. Next slide, please. And so this is the ratio of the unemployed to job vacancies. And, it's just basically like the number of non-permanent residents. I was talking about immigrants making up, essentially all our growth, but the number of non-permanent immigrants, so these are obviously people who are temporarily here employed in the trades, increased from 20,570 to 47,000, or 128% between 2016 and 2021. And the number of tradespeople 65 years and older increased by 8,500 people, or 11.8%. And most of that decline you see in other age groups as well. So for example, even those that are age 25 to 34, which make up a quarter of our employed trades people, they declined by nearly 4%. And those 45 to 54 saw declines of more than 20% or 75,290. So the construction sector, bottom line is, it's aging just like the rest of the country, and replacing skilled people is becoming more and more challenging. And the demand for trades, so we'll move on to the next slide. The demand for trades, so here you can see the percentage of employed tradespeople with certification in the various trades. So you can see the unemployed component. Next slide, please. So I'll get into the time loss and the safety record in a minute. The demand for trades, however, increased in comparison to labor supply. I mean, you just heard, I think the minister talk a little bit about, the investments that are being made. Well, this is, the earlier graph that I showed you in terms of the ratio of unemployment to job vacancies, where we saw further tightening of labor markets for construction and trade workers overall. And of course, many trades are not regulated without the need for a certificate to work. Less than 50%, in fact, of those in the construction, millwrights, and industrial mechanics trades were certified in 2021. And in construction, the vacancies required certified trades exceeded those who were unemployed, who met this criterion. So you only know this too well. Certification can take considerable time and resources, and in some instances, employers may end up hiring workers at lower skill levels. And all that to say that, like the country, the construction sector aged, immigration did not provide, that much relief, and we saw less certified workers in a sector which is facing significant shortages. So obviously, the challenges to the work that you do in keeping everybody safe are that much more important and marked. So moving on to injuries and fatalities, of course, you're the specialist in this particular area. I think Colin mentioned a pretty impressive figure in the opening there of a 40% reduction in fatalities. And I think according to the Workers' Compensation Boards of Canada figures, there were 194 fatalities in 2023 in the construction sector. And many have said that these numbers are significantly understated, even perhaps by a factor of 10. And these numbers don't include fatalities that, for example, that include commuting to and from work, private insurance, or provinces where an on-site accident can be claimed under a provincial system. And so the most common causes of fatalities, we'll move on. I see you were there. Great, thanks. Most of the common fatalities include falls, being struck by objects, caught in between objects, and electrocutions. And older workers are facing hearing loss and loss of balance, and younger workers are equally seeing distributed, these disturbing rising trends. And so your efforts are needed even more so than ever. And although you've made progress, the construction sector still outranks all other sectors when it comes to the number of fatalities. So there is a clear need to strengthen and to harmonize our system when it comes to fatality and injury related statistics in this vital sector. So, as I mentioned earlier, so these are some slides from Statistics Canada. They've actually got they've got a building hub where you can go and actually go and play with the numbers to see by province, by trade, what these look like. You can go to the next slide as well. So I encourage you to go to the Statistics Canada website and have a look at some of the visualization. This one talks a little bit about the stock and some of the some of the imbalances that we've got currently, which I'm sure you're all aware of in the housing sector. In 2023, so the construction sector employed, as I said, about 1.6 million workers, and this makes up about 8%, an impressive proportion of the total employment in the economy. It contributes over $150 billion to the economy annually, making up some 8% of our gross domestic product. And 53% of the workers were in specialty trades, 37% in residential and non-residential construction, with another 9% in heavy and civil engineering construction. Construction is one of the fastest growing sectors in this country, with growth projections of 3.5% to 4%, with construction output that's expected to reach some $256 billion, in the next couple of years by 2028. If you just going into the housing sector, if you look at the CMHC, the Canada Mortgage Housing Corporation, we have a deficit of some 3.5 million homes in Canada, and with the federal government, government's Canada Housing Plan, we're talking about, they're talking about a million homes being developed by 2031. That, of course, that still leaves us 2.5 million home gap between supply and demand for housing. And even by many, that 1 million forecast by through that Canada Housing Plan is seen to be optimistic, and largely because of challenges to labor, financing, and even material shortages. So if the demand is going to outstrip our capacity to meet it, how are we doing in our efforts to increase output or productivity? So, we talked about an aging population, this dependence upon immigration. They're not necessarily a great solution to this. And essentially people are aging out of the sector. We got demand that's going through the, through the roof, literally. And that's just in the housing sector. Of natural resources, we're talking about, with some of the challenges from the south, that's adding more pressure to increase our own resources and diversify our market. So, this imbalance, we're seeing it in multiple places. So we say, well, okay, well, can we do this faster, right? Can we use, can we have some productivity gains? Well, I wish I had great news for you. Productivity in its very simple terms is defined as the ratio of the output over the input. So in other words, the amount of effort that you put into producing a unit of output, how's it doing, right? And the more we increase the output compared to the effort in producing it, the more productive we become. And if we increase productivity, we increase our standard of living, as the surplus can be put towards, various social plans and our structure that we're used to, the quality of life enhancing measures, and so on. Well, on this slide, you can see that Canada used to fare decent, I would say, compared to others until the 1990s when it came to overall productivity. And unfortunately, we've been slipping hard. Quite dramatically recently when it comes to comparing us to the US, the G7, the G20, and unfortunately now even the rest of the industrialized and developing world. We now rank 18th in the OECD, with the 2023 labor productivity decrease being the worst, erasing all the gains that we made since 2017. And we've now fallen to about 60% of the productivity per person compared to the US, and projected to fall by another 10% just over the next few years. And you've heard a lot of talk about removing interprovincial barriers, skill mismatches, and lack of qualification recognition, as well as lower investments and leveraging of innovations. See, these are all significant contributors to this decline. Now, it's all the sectors in Canada are contributing to the productivity crisis, but construction makes up 12.5% of all the labor hours that are worked in Canada. So, it consumes an increasingly larger share of the resources So it thus, contributes in a very significant way to the overall productivity deficit or decline that we've seen in Canada. And it's so it's not just a matter of doing the same thing in the manner and working faster. I don't think those are the trade-offs to safety that we'd want to make. And so we can't simply layer on more regulations either, right? Since COVID, in fact, the overall regulatory burden has increased by some 40%. And that, of course, increases and exacerbates our productivity crisis that we're facing as a country. So next slide, please. Now, there have been calls for a complete rethink, as to how we build, especially in the housing sector, with more innovative methods, such as modular or prefabricated homes, which provide incentives to a better ratio of the output to that input equation, that productivity equation that I was talking about. Now, of course, this has huge implications for skills and codes and materials and labor, the automation, and of course, for safety. So, I mean, this slide just tells you a little bit, about the significant decreases in construction, in the construction sector. Next slide, please. This tells you a little bit about the makeup of the construction industry in terms of the percentage and the size of the firms. As you can see, in the construction sector, we've got relatively smaller or a higher proportion of smaller hiring firms. You see the number of firms with 5 to 19 people, as opposed to in the private sector overall, the comparison of firms with 500 or more people. So the point I'm trying to make with all these, so far, with the demographics, with the high demand, with the aging out, the size of the sector, the productivity crisis, I'm of the belief that this sector is now ripe for disruption. So the question that I'll say is, where are you in that disruption continuum? Are you disrupting it, or are you going to be the ones that are going to be disrupted? So let me make this not so subtle transition to my next point. How many of you think you're rational human beings? I think most of us would put up our hands and say, well, of course we're rational, right? Well, it's true that we like to think we are, but let me just ask you a few questions. How many of you are afraid of flying? How many of you have cheated and had to look at the phone when you were driving? Just to send a short text to say, I'll be home soon. The odds of dying in a plane crash are 1 in 11 million. The odds of a crash while texting and driving, 23 times higher than that. In fact, fatal crashes by distracted driving, cause more than 3,500 deaths in the US alone. And some people, of course, are afraid of swimming in the ocean because of shark attacks. Well, the odds of being killed by a shark are, 1 in 4.3 million. In fact, the odds of drowning while swimming, are 1 in 1,134. So more people die from getting hit by a coconut than from a shark. 47% of people killed in car crashes didn't have their seatbelts on. How many of you would never buy a car without test driving it first, right? You think that's a very prudent thing to do. Well, do you really think that 10-15 minutes drive will reveal anything about the car's long-term, durability, reliability, any mechanical issues, or how the car would perform under different seasons or road conditions? Well, it's much better to rely on expert reviews and data on long-term reliability of a particular model of a car in terms of its performance and durability. And yet, we as human beings, we trust our personal beliefs and we trust our biased experiences, against all the evidence and even solid data, right? How many of you have, all these automated, systems in your car? How many of you disable the automated emergency braking system, or the lane departure warning, or the anti-skid features, that are now becoming standard in cars? So we mistakenly have a sense of overconfidence in our abilities, are annoyed by all these alerts and distrust automation, when the evidence is clear that these technologies significantly reduce risk. And so in many cases, the same people who distrust technology and even proven data, these are the same people that are afraid of swimming in the ocean or flying, or prefer to shut off those features that are designed to protect us. So, would they still operate heavy machinery even if they were tired or upset? Another coffee, I should get over that, right? Get on a roof or skip the harness, for example. So a modern connected car, for example, generates 25 gigabytes of data each and every hour. So more than 100 different data points, including geolocation, navigation, companion apps, biometrics, voice control, onboard diagnostics, driver assistance systems. These all contribute to that real-time intelligence. In fact, it's projected that 95% of all cars by 2030 will be connected. An autonomous vehicle is estimated now to generate 20 terabytes of data each and every day. Well, let me give you an example of a company that's doing it. John Deere, all of you have heard of John Deere, has over 500,000 connected machines between its construction and agricultural divisions. And this is projected to grow to 1.5 million by the end of next year. Many are now autonomous vehicles and are considered to be sensors or data generators on wheels, right? Many will use satellites to connect to the cloud. And the data are now being used by farmers and agricultural operators using an app to make real-time decisions from their smartphones. Connected wearable technologies that once that one puts on the wrist or in our clothing, footwear, headwear, earwear, eyewear, they allow now for real-time activity tracking and health monitoring. You also know that robots are slowly making strides in various construction activities, from whether it's demolition, bricklaying, 3D printing building layout plans, finishing, things such as plaster and paint, in welding, concrete, placement and material handling, such as even rebar tying. They are providing greater speed and efficiency, improving accuracy and precision, reducing labor intensity and enhancing safety in often dangerous or hazardous tasks. See drones now that can scope out hazards and even undertake a number of safety surveillance, oversight, and monitoring activities. So the data that's generated from all these technologies are now being fed into artificial intelligence engines to get even better insights, generate more efficient and cost-effective ways to get things done. They, of course, present challenges such as high capital investment costs, of training and maintenance, adaptation, customization to various construction sites and environments, and job displacement even. But make no mistake, these changes are happening and they will further disrupt your industry, providing both risks, challenges, but equally opportunities. And this new environment, clearly from a governance perspective, raises a bunch of issues like ethics, issues of transparency, autonomy, and even data sovereignty. So what happens, for example, when a wearable sensor routinely singles out a worker for being tired or inattentive? Do you allow the worker to override a safety feature, like, turning off that lane departure warning that I was talking about in the car? And what does that mean for legal liability, right? Will HR have access to these data to provide performance management reports to supervisors and management about that particular employee, for example? Will the company producing the robots or the wearable sensors have access to individual data? Will consent be required? And what should that balance be between efficiency and safety, between that transparency and individual control, between privacy and accountability? Well, these decisions, believe it or not, are being contemplated and baked into these kinds of systems today. AI algorithms, are already using, real-time or pilot project data or simulated data to create various scenarios. How connected are you in the decisions that are being made? How engaged are you? How engaged are unions, contractors, employees, and companies on these data-driven decisions? Are you going to be a player and an influencer, or are you going to be an observer and a taker, right? The intellectual insights that, these hold tremendous value, and they're going to create competition where potentially the winner takes all in terms of disrupting your business. Believe it or not, like me, you are in the data business. Data management, data literacy, data governance, data ethics, these are now important and essential skill sets in your toolkit. How proficient are you will these decisions will determine how effective you become in this new and exciting digital era. It's okay. It's okay to be a little frightened and at the same time excited, but I think don't be caught like a deer in the headlights. It's okay to be a data geek. So with that, Colin, I turn to you and we can get into some questions and answers. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Anil. There's, a couple things that right off the bat, if you do have a question from the audience, please pop it into the comments section there. Emery's going to give me a hand on identifying those. We'll try to work those in. But right off the bat, Mike, I have a question around between technology, productivity, and how we manage safety in terms of not being a victim in the process of trying to become more productive. But the construction sector as a whole has not experienced the same kind of productivity gains that other industries have, like manufacturing, for example. Phenomenal changes in it. And I think it was in a conversation with you that the number of working days going into building the average home really hasn't changed over the last 20 or 30 years. And I think you told me it's like 930 some working days that go into that. Could you speak a bit more about that?
Yeah. No, it goes back even earlier when you look at some of the statistics, of what, obviously on a comparable basis, the number of person days that goes into building a home. Look, there's far more regulations, there's far more, hoops that we have to jump through. So, that does relate to an increased safety. There's no question about it. But the effort that we put into building a house, over the last, almost 80 years, frankly, hasn't changed that much. We still rely on labor. Yes, of course, there's automation with some of the hand tools and things like that. But we have not seen productivity gains in the construction sector, in the housing sector, for example, right? And so, as I was mentioning earlier, the construction sector is a huge contributor to the overall economy. And some have even postulated that if the construction sector had just kept up, the productivity and maybe even increased it by, let's say, even 0.5%, that would have resulted in some, at least at the Canada level, the productivity to have been maintained over time. So that's how much of an impact it makes to the overall productivity. And as I said earlier, productivity is another word for essentially maintaining our standard of living. The more productive that we are, the more surplus, in a sense, between that the input and the output, that gives you that opportunity to invest in other social programs and so on. So with the demographics, with an aging construction sector, it's not, as you said, it's not just a matter of driving our people to do more and faster, right? It's that equation will just not work. And especially construction in many cases is a labor intensive activity, and so as we age out, it's not like in the service sector, right? So we have to fundamentally rethink construction so that it becomes a less labor intensive profession. It starts to use a lot more of the intelligence, i.e. in the data, uses a lot more of the technology to actually substitute, in many cases, the activities that are undertaken by people in what are relatively, in many cases, dangerous types of activities. So, so you can have the equation, Colin, where we could actually see increased productivity and increased safety because we're starting to now make better use of the intelligence and the technology and the automation that's facing us.
So to actually use some elements of automation, maybe perhaps modular functions that can be done in a more protected environment and then assembled on site, is that more of the model that you're suggesting?
Well, look, I'm not an expert in how to tell you how to construct better homes, but what I'm saying is that it's going to take a complete rethink about how we do things, right? So it's not going to be changes around the margins that are so. Like, first is, how do you even replace the people that are exiting, right? I mean, that in itself is a significant challenge in the construction sector, whether it's in, housing, or whether it's in natural resources extraction, or whatever, or manufacturing. So those same elements are going to be there. So we have to at least stopgap that kind of exodus. And then I'm saying on top of that, we have to rethink how it is that we do things, whether it's on site, with drones and automation, and with wearables, and with, a human assisted automation that gets us better productivity, or, as you said, in some cases, in prefabrication. And so it's not one or the other. I think it's going to be a combination of things, and it's happening. It's already happening. The thing is that those that are doing the disrupting are really, they don't really care about the same values and the same kinds of things within a particular sector. And we've seen that over and over again, right? Look at, the old Blockbuster and Netflix and, right, Kodak and whatever. Well, that disruption is happening, and the disruption is coming from a very different place, than people who are in the sector itself.
Okay. I got another question. I actually had it down here, but I also see a very similar one in the chat. And how does a small company, say less than 10, because the majority of companies are in that space, particularly in Saskatchewan, how do they use or get into data to improve what their processes? And because essentially, how do they compete with a large company that's perhaps benefited from some of this and having large amounts of data? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's it's highly dependent upon, what the niche is that you occupy, right? If you're a small company and you have a very specialized niche that you're, operating in, chances are you've got expertise, right? That domain knowledge of, whatever it is that you're doing. Doesn't mean that the larger company couldn't buy that expertise and kind of, disrupt you. So it doesn't guarantee you in any, a way success, but you have agility on your side. Large companies, tend to have a lot more governance, a lot more layers, and so on. In a small company, you can, it's first to market, right? Is an advantage. And then but it's not enough to just kind of get to the next plateau and then rest on your laurels. It's about how do you continuously, continue to innovate to get that market share. So agile, but you can't do it without the kind of resources that you need. So if you don't have the expertise in data intelligence, computing, and the domain knowledge, whatever that business is, well, you're going to get out competed, and you're going to, it's only a matter of time when somebody else is going to take over your function.
Right. One of the tools that the SCSA provides to its members is the SCSA Analytics platform, which is really a phenomenal. It's a layers of different data, from audit and training data to historic data in terms of company performance, to allow companies who are very small be able to essentially have that kind of leverage that a large company that can put a lot of work hours and measure those. So there is some ability for those small companies to be able to compete, produce those reports, actually be able to bid on jobs with data behind them, so they can support. Hey, we have great systems in place to be able to manufacture or to put together a product for you, and see that there's a bit being shared on the screen what some of that platform may look like and how to set somebody up. Could you while that's playing, what other shifts in the industry that perhaps you've seen nationally or globally that you think could inform what we do at a provincial level today? Do you see things that are coming down next that we should be thinking about, and maybe you've seen on the other side of the planet as you go on your journeys?
Well, let me just firstly pick up on your the analytic platform. I had a chance to kind of look at it, and I actually went through some of your overall industry, and I would say in terms of taking data, analyzing it, putting it in consumable chart forms or tables, and then being able to kind of slice and dice it. I think that's great. I think that's really, really important. But I would ask your members, to what degree do you actually use that information? I mean, do you use it as, do you cut and paste it into your annual report as a look, this is kind of what you know, the industries or benchmark where you are or whatever, which is good. I mean, that's a good start. Don't get me wrong, you know, but how much does it get into the decision-making boardroom table? You know, I would say that's the first question you need to ask yourself. And then the second thing is, you know, like, for example, I'd ask you, you know, how many requests do you get for microdata? In other words, like, can you give me, okay, that's great that you gave me a report with everything else, but I want the microdata. Like, I actually want the individual records. You can anonymize them and you can mask things and so on. But when you look at AI, you know, of course it looks at, you know, high level analytics, but it is voracious in looking at, you know, the actual microdata. And so I asked the question, well, how do you know it's not biased? You know, do you know how it was collected? Who was left out of that data? You know, how representative is it? You know, so you need people on your, you know, in your particular organization, whether you're, you know, a supplier, whether you're actually, you know, a safety consultant or an association. Well, you need to now get to become really comfortable with the microdata and managing it and using it to your advantage. Like, the person or the organization that gets at the insight, those patterns that you see between things, and then starts to now embed them into your practice as a service, or whether it's your product or whether it's to improve your product, that's where the innovation is. And that's going to require, you know, some investment. And so the metrics that you like, that you use to see, you know, whether the data are really generating value, adding productivity, adding market share, providing services that you can now market to the rest of the industry or even globally. Really, it's the intelligence that is now your secret, you know, weapon in a sense. Yeah, in terms of, you know, what's happening globally, I mean, you see some of the advancements in China, even India. You know, you look at Korea, you look at United States, you look at some of the advancements in automation. I mean, I gave the example of John Deere, right? I mean, literally, it is now a data company, right? You look at Rolls-Royce, right? And they make engines for the planes, right? I mean, they are harnessing the data, you know, before the plane even lands, you know, trillions of bytes of data that tell them, you know, the performance of every particular part. And so they have the least amount of downtime, you know, between flights, so that they can increase, obviously, safety, right? Because things won't, you know, are going to be looked at before they fail, or, you know, they're going to be able to keep the time, you know, that's not productive to a particular to a minimum. So they get that kind of maximum productivity, and they get minimum downtime. This is just the beginning, Colin. I mean, this data revolution and you know, the matching with AI and the kind of products and services that are going to come up as a result of understanding those algorithms and patterns that, you know, we didn't really pay attention to for a long time. And so as data become more available, you know, through sensors and through devices, and you know, I think harnessing those data to get at those patterns and the intelligence, which then starts to, you know, increase your stance. So I think we have to break out of that mindset that, you know, if somehow we want to increase productivity, you know, that somehow, you know, that means that we're going to have to trade off safety. Not the case at all. You have to go in with the mindset that we can do both. And now data and the intelligence that's locked into the actually give us the possibility of doing both of these things.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. Can I make I may have to make two shifts here, but one of them kind of in the context of, I'm going to say, the current political environment, the talk on tariffs, maybe the shift that Canada has decidedly made, and all political parties are talking about, whether it be large scale construction, pipelines, energy corridors, all that requires significant amount of capital investment, human investment, lots of building. You know, this environment is ripe for this kind of disruption, because that's what's probably going to be necessary to actually complete these kinds of tasks. Do you have any insight on that as well?
Yeah, you know, absolutely. I mean, that's been the, you know, talk of the current political campaign. I think, you know, each of the leaders have talked about how important infrastructure and resource development is going to be to the future of this country. And, you know, clearly that infrastructure is essential if we are to diversify our markets, But as you said, like it's not just going to happen. Given all the things that I just talked about in terms of demographics, in terms of the current regulatory systems, and in the way in which we need to do consensus building and consultation, and interprovincial and federal provincial jurisdictional kinds of boundaries, and Indigenous governments and so on. So you know that you're going to have to think differently. You're going to have to use different tools. We're going to have to attract the kind of investments which people see certainty for these projects. But data, I think, and intelligence are going to be really important, that are going to be juxtaposed with human ingenuity. And as I gave my examples of, sometimes what we think is rational, the data don't prove that to be rational behavior. So I think many people have said, how do we, like, I've seen the enemy and it is me kind of thing, so how do we get out of our own way, and in a sense, how do you pilot things, how do you try things, and that's going to be by bringing diverse views and that intelligence together to come up with new and innovative ways. And whether it's in our mining sector, whether it's in our extractive sectors, generally, whether it's in our construction sectors, I am still very optimistic, right? I mean, these are businesses that we've made, and we can point to examples where we're global leaders. They came because a small number of people came up with new ideas to disrupt the industry and challenge the status quo. And I think the safety industry needs to be part and an active contributor, to that dialogue that's going on. So I would say that's what's needed right now. It's going to happen, and if Canada doesn't do it, somebody else will do it, and then we're going to be takers. Right?
That's right. Yeah, they'll eat the lunch.
Yeah.
I got another great question here. It's actually just popped up on the screen here in terms of statistical methods you might recommend for analyzing injury data. Particularly when we talk about the aging workforce. Your graphs that's exactly what's happening here in Saskatchewan, and so what kind of methods would you suggest if you have any in terms of managing, in terms of statistical methods to analyze that kind of stuff?
Sure. Thank you for the question, Sandra. These are, first thing I would say is, let's not over complexify the equation. Sometimes we don't need the kind of the full weight of the statistical models and techniques in order to be able to get at, for example, I think you mentioned in your question, the aging population, better understanding the demographics that are at play. It's about understanding, the data that you are gathering, how representative is it? Like, is it representative of the industry? Does it have the kind of disaggregation in terms of men, women, in terms of immigrants, non-immigrants, non-permanent, permanent? Does it have the breakdown of the age groups and so on? So how representative is it of that particular subsector, or the entire industry vis-a-vis the country, right? And where trends are. So just being able to use statistical methods to benchmark your particular data set with the broader context, I think is important. And that's where you can go to sources like the census data from Statistics Canada and start to benchmark your data set, against where things are. There are surveys that are done all the time, and we rely on surveys. And again, just understanding the statistical sampling method. Like, so how was that particular survey put together? Who was it that put it together? How was that? What was the response rate? And how representative was it? So it's about digging into the metadata. It's about digging into the paradata, and then understanding how those data were gathered. Because all too often, what do? We say, oh yeah, there was a survey done, that was it. Okay, forget the notes and footnotes and whatever. Let's start using it, right? And then you see, in fact, people pumping them now into these models and even AI engines, thinking, that they're going to get a better product out. But it's the old adage, right? Garbage in, garbage out. So you got to understand the strengths and the limitations of the data, how representative they are, and there are statistical tools, and there are techniques, and there are benchmarks. So you can even adjust for the weights, right? So if you've got an underrepresentation in youth, females, for example, in your sample, well, you can adjust for it by adjusting the weights and so on. In terms of the outputs, again, I think it's really, really important to control for various factors. So basic regression mechanisms can kind of try to say, okay, if we kept these things under control, do we still get the kind of result that we're expecting and so on. So again, I think there are statistical tools, methods, analysis, but it's about having a bit of a critical mind, I would say, having this kind of, raised eyebrow, if you know what I mean, like, I don't know, that doesn't look good or doesn't quite look right, So it's about having critical, thinking skills that we need to have, because you can't just kind of place trust in whatever you get handed to you as a data set. And I see a lot of people falling into the traps where they go, well, here's the output, but it doesn't really make sense. You got to look at the whole supply chain and make sure that you're asking those questions of experts.
Yeah. One last question here from Ed here. How does a data champion work with the idea that big data or AI reporting are surveillance or some other kind of nuisance? Because that's obviously, one of the things that people can get concerned about. Hey, what about my personal data? Somebody just watching me for the sake of watching me. Are there some things that you've got, that you could probably suggest in that regard?
Yeah, look, absolutely, and that's again something that I think organizations need to kind of ask themselves is, okay, well, what, just because I can do something with data, should I? I gave you the example about wearable technologies and the kind of data that they can give you on a particular worker. So should you have it by worker? Now maybe it makes sense in some cases. You've got consent in place, and you're working with the individual. But even who has access to that information within the organization? Who knows if the person could be on medication, right? And it's not just they were out partying all night or whatever it is. So these kinds of things. So it's not just a matter of getting the statistical skills, but you have to kind of you have to worry about who's going to mine that data. How is it going to be available? Can they kind of do some backward identification to get at how Colin is doing today? So these are what does certification mean, right? And we talked about tradespeople, and I
Right.
talked a little bit about those trends. We talked about language skills and new immigrants. Not all of them are proficient perfectly on the day that they arrive here. So I think we are going to have to now start to think about all those aspects of data governance, and how is it that we are both responsible as well as more discerning and intelligent about the patterns that we see. And as I said in my opening remarks, how are you involved in those discussions? And the question is, should you be involved in those discussions? Because if you're not, you're going to be a taker, because somebody's going to create a product, an algorithm, an app, a built-in kind of data flow, and then guess what? You're not going to have any choice. And that's look at so many of our social media now. It's rare that you have full control of the data. The data is you are the product, and the data are now being used to market and make decisions about you. So in this industry, as it's being disrupted, what role do you want to play as an individual company, as a leader, or an association in how those data are governed?
100%. And you talked about it at the edges earlier on, but part of the governance is, what are our ethical boundaries? What are the things that we find important, that we value, which lines do we choose we will not cross, and how do we ensure that if we do bump into those, what are we going to do about that if somebody does violate that particular value? So,
and you're going to have to get experts from the outside, because in many cases these are not domain specific experts. What I think is acceptable in my company to get ahead may not necessarily be something that everybody agrees on. So how are you going to have maybe even some scrutiny to the decision that you've made? So they're going to say, well, who did you run it by? Who was the expert? So believe it or not, these are now disciplines of psychology and ethicists and philosophy even, along with data science and hard skills, they're now going to have to come together to make, these calls, because if you as an industry or you as a company lose the trust of your, stakeholders or your clients or, others and I haven't even talked about misinformation, well then, you're going to be in a bit of hurt, right? And guess what? It is a highly competitive industry. Your competitors, they're going to be your rivals. They're going to be looking to get that edge up over you. They may not play by the same rules as you might.
Yeah. Um, uh, hey, is there a book or reference that you may have some insight that you could mention really quick, if that on data science you might refer people to?
None that comes off, but maybe it's time you wrote your own book on on this sector, because I don't, honestly, I don't think there's a tremendous amount of literature. There's lots of, tons and tons of books on AI governance and digital governance. Right. You mentioned at the top, I even teach a course on that. So there's no shortage of the basics on it. But I would say, I think specific domain practices are in short supply. Okay. So this is the book that you get to write.
Okay, all right. I'll start scratching something out here soon. And Neil, I really appreciate this conversation. For somebody that I get to poke fun at every once in a while, we get to laugh at each other. And for a guy who started off putting insulation in the houses, I mean, you've turned out pretty good. You're a smart guy.
See, there's hope. There's hope for all of us.
Hey, are there any final thoughts that you want to share before I hand things back over to Dallas and Sue?
Well, I just want to say thanks for taking the courage to bring, somebody who is, not necessarily from, deep into your expertise. It's a different domain, but that's what we need, right? We need innovation is about taking ideas, from different areas, not being, afraid to kind of, steal, beg, borrow, and share. And that's what this new world is about. It's about bringing different disciplines, ideas that may not necessarily be. I think the kind of that group think can sometimes limit choices and opportunities. So I encourage what you're doing, and I hope that you'll only continue on this journey. So thanks, Colin. You've been a great friend and a colleague, and what you're doing is, along with the industry and all your partners and stakeholders, is really, really crucial for this moment in Canada.
Well, I again appreciate what you're saying, and what you taking the time to cutting the time with us to be able to share. And it's absolutely, our industry is one that it's easy to kind of get caught in your own echo chamber of what things are like in our industry or safety specifically, and having the opportunity to kind of challenge ourselves, look outside of the box, and see if there are areas that we can advance both safety but also move the industry forward in a highly competitive environment globally. So again, I really appreciate it. Folks, again, Anil Anora, I think our presentation here, if people are looking for it, I think we'll be able to make it available. Anil's agreed to that, and I will bring. I think Sue and Dallas are probably waiting in the wings for us here. There they are. So again, thank you, Anil. Thank you, everybody, for signing into this session, and really appreciate it. And I'll hand things back to Sue and Dallas.
Thank you very much. Wish you the best for the rest of the session.
Awesome. Bye for now.
Thanks. Bye-bye.